بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الحمد لله الذي جعل ذكره طمأنينة للقلوب وجلاء لها عن رين الذنوب ومطرات لوسواس الخناس المكذوب، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد الداعي إلى كل فعل محبوب وأمر مطلوب، وعلى آله وأصحابه المقتفين سبيله على خير أسلوب. أما بعد، فيقول رب تبارك وتعالى في كتابه المنزل: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل لو كان البحر مدادا لكلمات ربي لنفد البحر قبل أن تنفد كلمات ربي ولو جئنا بمثله مددا. قل إنما أنا بشر مثلكم يوحى إلي أنما إلهكم إله واحد، فمن كان يرجو لقاء ربه فليعمل عملا صالحا ولا يشرك بعبادة ربه أحدا. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our 11th session on Imam Ghazali's teachings on intention, sincerity, and verbal habits. In our last session, we discussed broadly 4 topics. The first was the interpretation of this penultimate verse that I read to you just now from Surah Al-Kahf, which was an interpretation to see our worship with sincerity as a meeting with Allah, and in that a reflection of the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, where Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam explained al-ihsan as ka'annaka tara, as if you see. Worship Allah as if you see him, for verily if you do not see him, he sees you. فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ, he sees you. The second thing we reflected on was that the nature of thoughts in the human mind, and in the form of simulations. And if I say do not think of an elephant, your mind will simulate a large chunky animal with trunk. And not only that, but you will simulate such details as orientation, color, and with full modeling of what they're doing, depending on what the sentence is. And we will do this engaging with brain networks and systems as if we were seeing the elephant in real life. Now, and this is so, we know this, we've found this out through experiments, that if I say to you that the carpenter hammered the nail into the ground, you will simulate a picture in your mind of a nail in the vertical position. But if I say to you that the carpenter placed the nail on the floor, then you will simulate a nail in the horizontal position. And we know this because if you give someone to read this sentence and then you show them the picture of a nail in one of those two orientations, and you ask them if this nail had been mentioned in the sentence that just was presented to you earlier, they will recognize that picture faster if it coincided with the orientation that was in the sentence. So you're actually making simulations. So, and the point was that when you simulate people noticing you and speaking about you, it provokes, these simulations have deep connections and they create emotional states. And those states stimulate an urge to perpetuate the behavior to make these things come through. And that's the problem. So in order to deal with this, the third thing we looked at was in the chapter on treatment of Riyad, the disease of urge to show. We learned that Riyad comes from 3 thoughts in the mind, either compound or successively one after the other. The first is the thought of people noticing you, that, oh, people are noticing me. And then the thought of wanting people to be impressed and praise you because of what they have noticed, which is followed then by a determination to make these previous 2 thoughts a reality. And that cascade of thought is due to this intense form of simulation that goes on in the mind. And so Imam Ghazali has given us the best way to deal with it, and which was that you've got to protect yourself from this cascade of simulations. And the way to do it is to reject the first thought as it appears in the consciousness. To say to yourselves, "Ma laka wa lil khalq," that what is it to you if people know? Whether they know or they don't, or they know or not know, the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows shouldn't that be sufficient for you? Shouldn't the fact that Allah knows be sufficient for you? That's the question you've got to use to push it away. And this should be followed by an aversion in the mind, a dislike in the mind, in the heart, a rejection of this, because we should dislike it and reject it as a dangerous thing. That this is a dangerous thing. Like you have an aversion to all dangerous things. If a snake appears, you will have an aversion to it. If something dangerous appears, then that same sense of danger and of aversion should be in your heart. The other point to bear in mind was that the heart often gets crowded with emotion, and then overwhelmed, and there's no spaces left. Like Imam Ghazali gave us a beautiful example, which is the example of the acridity, the bitterness of anger, where a person may know a lot about the virtues of composure and of restraint and patience and all the other things, and he may also know all about the harms and the serious consequences of anger. But when caught in a fit of anger himself, his heart, his consciousness is left with no space for his knowledge to benefit him. There's no space for that knowledge to become active, what is known as hudur. The heart has no active space to deal with those things because of the emotional state. The simulations have gone way beyond the ability for you to benefit from your knowledge. So there's no room at all in remembering all the harm that is attached to this. And this is exactly what happens with Riya. But instead of the acridity and bitterness, it's sweetness and enjoyment. And these are both emotions. You feel the emotion of anger that causes this bitterness in the mind, and the emotion of pleasure, the sweetness of the pleasure of knowing that people are praising you. So one can enter into a euphoric state that leaves no room for remembering all the harm that is attached to Riya. And that's the point. Therefore, it is safer to arrest that thought in the beginning, as soon as it occurs, together with bringing to mind all the calamities that are attached to that stream of thought. That you have to remember that this is a cascade. This is a cascade that will happen. It will simulate you into destruction. We need to combat one stream of simulations with another stream of simulations to see, and that is what would happen if on the day of judgment you are told kadabt, that you lied. Now today I want to read excerpts from Kitabuniyati wal Ikhlas, which is the book of intention and sincerity. And I know you must be wondering, well, then which book were we reading from all this time? The fact is that the Ihya is comprised of 40 books. And so far, we've been reading from Kitabu Dhamm al-Jahi wal Riya, which is the book of condemnation of love for celebrity and ostentation. And the reason I did this was that in this study of the subject of Ikhlas, I have found that it is very beneficial. It's useful to read around the subject before delving into it proper. First, you read around it. So having an understanding of what is Hubbul Jah and what is Riya, I feel it is a necessary prerequisite for approaching the subject of sincerity, especially for us living as we do in a hyper-ostentatious society. As I said, I call it hyper-Riya society, where celebrity culture and the impulse to show off is often dominant in our minds, in our consciousness. Another closely related topic to Ikhlas is the topic of sidq, truth. Now, in fact, the Imam Ghazali attached this synonym, he attaches the word sidq in a synonymous way to sincerity, to Ikhlas, in the introductory paragraph of the book. So I'm going to read that first, and then we'll go back to the other aspects of reading. Okay, on the first page, okay, he has a beautiful khutbah at the beginning. I would love to read it, but yeah, we've already finished 15 minutes. Okay, he says, أما بعد فقد انكشف لأرباب القلوب ببصيرة الإيمان وأنوار القرآن أن لا وصول إلى السعادة إلا بالعلم والعبادة. It has been dawned upon the hearts of those people with insight, with deep insight and iman, and who has the light of Quran in their heart, that there is no path to salvation except with knowledge and practice, knowledge and deeds and good deeds. فَالنَّاسُ كُلُّهُمْ هَلْكَ إِلَّا الْعَالِمُونَ. And so people are all in a state on the brink of destruction except those who know, who has knowledge. وَالْعَالِمُونَ كُلُّهُمْ هَلْكَ إِلَّا الْعَامِلُونَ. And those who have knowledge are all on the brink of destruction except those who practice what they know. وَالْعَامِلُونَ كُلُّهُمْ هَلْكَ إِلَّا الْمُخْلِصِينَ. So those who are acting, those who do act upon their knowledge, are also on the brink of destruction, except those who are sincere, al-mukhlisin. Wal-mukhlisuna ala khatarin azim, and the sincere ones are in great danger. فَالْعَمَلُ بِغَيْرِ نِيَّةٍ عَنَاء. So action without intention is pain and trouble. وَالنِّيَّةُ بِغَيْرِ إِخْلَاصٍ رِيَاء. And the intention without sincerity is riya, is ostentation. وَهُوَ لِلنِّفَاقِ كِفَاء. And it is sufficient for a person to be, for one to be labeled a hypocrite. وَمَعْ الْعِصْيَانِ سَوَاء. And it is equal to disobedience. وَالْإِخْلَاصُ مِنْ غَيْرِ صِدْقٍ وَتَحْقِيقٍ مِنْ غَيْرِ صِدْقٍ وَتَحْقِيقٍ هَبَاء. And it's ikhlas without sidq, without truth in it, and without truthfulness in it, is waste. It's like dust. It's floating. It's nothing. وقد قال الله تعالى في كل عمل كان بإرادة الله بغير إرادة الله بإرادة غير الله مشبوها مغموما. That he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that any action that is done with the will of what done for the motivation of any other than Allah, then that is tainted and submerged. It's lost. وَقَدِمْنَا إِلَى مَا عَمِلُوا مِنْ عَمَلٍ فَجَعَلْنَاهُ هَبَاءً مَنْثُورًا. هَبَاءً مَنْثُورًا. That we shall turn whatever they did as floating dust. It will be scattered dust. There will be nothing, dispersed dust. وليت شعري كيف يصح نيته من لا يعرف حقيقة النية. And how is it possible that someone will be able to construct a proper intention when they have no idea of what the reality of intention is? وكيف يخلص من صحها النية إذا لم يعرف حقيقة الإخلاص. And how are you able to construct, how will you be able to form ikhlas, sincerity, when you have no idea what the reality, what true ikhlas is? وكيف تطالب المخلص نفسه بالصدق إذا لم يتحقق معناه. And how is it possible that someone will be required to indulge, to perform truthfully, in truth, when he has no idea what it is? فالوظيفة الأولى على كل عبد أراد طاعة الله تعالى. So the responsibility for every believer, every slave, every servant who intends to follow Allah, and يتعلم النية, that he learns niyyah, he studies niyyah, he studies intention أولا لتحصل المعرفة, to know to have the knowledge, the required knowledge. ثم يصححها بالعمل بعد فهم حقيقة الصدق والإخلاص. And then he corrects it with knowledge, with action, after having understood the reality of sidq wal ikhlas, the reality of truthfulness and sincerity. So they're used next to each other. اللذين هما وسيلتا العبد إلى النجاح. And because these two are the two means that through which the servant achieves salvation. ونحن نذكر معاني الصدق والإخلاص في ثلاثة أبواب. And we are mentioning sidq and ikhlas in three chapters. And the first is Kitabu حقيقة النية ومعناها. The reality, the first bab is the reality of niyyah and its meaning. And then the second bab is the reality of في الإخلاص وحقائقها, in the about ikhlas and its reality and its true nature. And then the third is في الصدق وحقيقته, The third is in about sidq, about truthfulness and its reality. Now, and here I want to speak a bit about sidq in more general terms, because this is not only synonymous with ikhlas, but it is similar, as I said, to the previous subjects we've studied so far, which was as in the amplified relevance to our context specifically, like in the same way how Riyad had an amplified relevance to our context. This also, sidq also, the popular culture in which we live has a problematic relationship with the concept of sidq in a variety of fields, a variety of spheres of life. The first one, of course, that will come to mind if you talk about speech and lies and truth, that the first thing that comes to mind is that of the sphere of politics and the words of politicians, which of course is limited in the sense that at election times they make promises and they change their opinion or they fail to do what they promised. But there are other areas that are much more pervasive in our day-to-day life, and even more, which are even more than politics. And there are two. One is in business marketing, to which we are all exposed on a continuous basis. And the other is in popular philosophy, more specifically postmodern philosophy, where the very concept of truth is seen as suspect. Now, I want to deal with the first of the two today. Inshallah, next week we'll have time to deal with the second one, with the postmodern philosophy, which is particularly relevant to students at university, because you come up against these sorts of things. And it's important for you to understand the basis of the Islamic treatment and the structure of fundamentals, and this fundament at the heart of our worldview. Now, the opposite to sidq is, of course, kidb, which is lies. The opposite to truth is lie, which is the same, which is the word that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will use on the opening scene in the Day of Judgment. That scene I keep painting for you, which was that of the three people who will come and they will say, I did X and I did Y and I did this. Those people will not be told that you didn't do what you said you did. Yes, you did, but the intention was wrong. You did it, and for that reason, they will be told, kadhabt, that you lied. Now, if I were to ask you to think about it in which context people most frequently are prone to insincere words, where do we find pretense, deceit, exaggerations, and deceptions most in our day-to-day life? We will arrive at the conclusion that it is in the marketplace. When people are trying to convince their customers to buy their products, they tend to exaggerate and deceive. So, and this is why, one of the reasons, of course, why Rasulullah ﷺ said, "Sharrul biqa'i aswaquha," that the worst places on the face of the earth is the marketplace. And this is a place where shaitan causes people to fall in love with the vanishing world and forget the permanent world. And it is also a place where people tend to lie repeatedly in order to get their custom to buy their items. And they indulge in all sorts of creative language to convince you that you need these products, you deserve it. And then and they trying to convince you of its quality through exaggerations and misrepresentations. Now, some might think that I'm the one who is exaggerating here. It's not so bad, but I assure you, if you take a look at the deceptive messaging in business today in our world, where the marketplace is no longer confined to the bazaars, as it used to be in the olden days. In our time, the marketplace is everywhere, from the billboards on our roads to the adverts in our pockets. An average person in modern day Britain today will see every day 5,000 adverts. And that's a conservative estimate. Those are messages. And as for the accuracy of those messages, you have to look at the large array of deceptive tactics that are being used, employed when in the production of these messages. There's a long list. I mean, you can Google it, false advertising, and you will see it as misleading illustrations, false coloring, angel dusting, bait and switch, misleading health claims, manipulation of terms, small print, incomplete comparison, inconsistent comparison, false labeling, disguised packaging, and the list goes on and on and on. And this is why there is a cat and mouse relationship between governments and big business over regulation on preventing deception in advertising. But governments are usually the losing end of these bargains, because they're heavily lobbied and threatened to discard regulation on a regular basis. You prevent the use of these big business wants regulation to vanish so they can say what they want and do what they want. And this has consequences for the way we, or for the way society, relate to the concept of truth, the concept of sidq. And I'm not talking about rogue traders here on the margins of society. No. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about everyday, large-scale multinational companies that are regularly fined for, millions of pounds for lack of sidq in their messaging. For example, in 2015, a cereal company with the same name as a college here in Oxford, Kellogg College, the Kellogg Company, had not Kellogg College. It had the same name as the college, but I think they got donations from the company or foundation linked to the company, and they had to pay £5 million to settle a class action lawsuit because they were claiming that their product was all natural, when in fact it contained a whole host of synthetic and artificial ingredients, pyridoxine hydrochloride and calcium, pantothecinate and glycerin and sodium phosphate, whole loads of things it had in it. Now, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. This is pervasive. The world we live in is in dire need of sincerity and truth to deal with deceptive messaging in the marketplace. The consequences are real and pervasive. One lie repeated can affect the entire world and everyone in it. Yes, I'm saying one lie can say, when people create or craft a lie and that lie get repeated, it can affect the entire world and everyone in it. In 2008, we had a global financial crash, which is an example of this. It was caused by lies, the lack of sidq. And they did toxic debt was willfully rebranded as and sold with new labels. They knew that these things were terrible, that these things would collapse, but they rebranded them and sold them. And then you ended up, they were sold as toxic stuff was sold as structured investment vehicles and high-grade enhanced structured opportunities and all sorts of fancy labels, which was all lies. Now, this global crash was the direct result of a lack of sidq and ikhlas, lack of truth and sincerity in the marketplace. This is, of course, just a problem, not just a problem in big finance. It has severe consequences. Lack of sidq and ikhlas has severe consequences for the well-being of human beings as a whole. One of the other area of deceptive messages in business is in the area of food, cigarettes. 8 million people are dying every year from smoking. And according to the WHO, 500 million. In the last century, 100 million died, and in the coming century, 500 million. That's their estimate. In the 20th century, 100 million. Now, this is all set to happen, even though medical experts published their findings that cigarettes cause cancer way back in the 1960s. But what happened? There was conclusive evidence that cigarettes causes cancer in the 1960s. But in 1969, several of the major tobacco companies came together and formulated a strategy to undermine the knowledge that this happens. And there's a famous memo, you can Google that, that says where they agreed on a strategy. And the strategy was a judo strategy where you use the strength of the opponent and you defeat them. So they said that doubt is our product. And we'll come back to this idea of doubt. Because if you say, in order to create doubt over the research, over the findings, they said we need more research. And since the 1960s, they continue saying we need more research. For something, they created confusion over something that was crystal clear. Smoking causes cancer. This is straightforward undeniable scientific finding, but they've done this. It's a form of lying. It's a form of avoiding sidq. And at the heart of it, of course, is the idea of greed is good. Greed and the glorification of greed, which in the words of Ayn Rand is greed is healthy. And Ivan Boyarsky, who told the business class graduating that you can be greedy and still feel good about yourself. And there's a long list of influential people who sanitize endless greed under various guises, from Bernard Mandeville, Fables of Bees, to Adam Smith's Hidden Hand, and from Ayn Rand's Healthy Greed to Dawkins' Selfish Gene. The result today is that half of the world's wealth is concentrated in 1% of the people on the planet. Half of the world, and 90% of the wealth is in 15% in the hands of 15%, while 800 million people go to bed at night hungry in our world today. So greed that fosters the lies, that causes, it motivates people to lie and plays a big part in the inequality we see around us. So it affects us. Lack of sidq, lack of ikhlas in these affairs has serious consequences for the world in which we live in. Now, in contrast, one has to ask, how is it that the country with the largest number of Muslims in our world today accepted Islam via Muslim merchants, Muslim traders? What was so different about Muslim traders that millions were prepared to accept Islam after Muslim merchants landed on their shores? To answer this, we have to look at the teachings of Islam on sidq and ikhlas, on truthfulness and sincerity. What is the most important ideal for a Muslim in the marketplace? It is sidq and ikhlas. A sincere Muslim trader is someone who speaks the truth not only because it will benefit his custom, but because it is a duty enjoined upon him by his creator, by Allah, who says in the Quran, فَأَوْفُوا الْكَيْلَ وَالْمِيزَانَ وَلَا تَبْخَسُوا النَّاسَ أَشْيَاءَهُمْ وَلَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ بَعْدَ إِصْلَاحِهَا ذَلِكُمْ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Fulfill the measure and the weight, and do not deprive people of their due, and cause not corruption upon the earth after its reformation. That is better if you should be believers. And then the Prophet ﷺ is declaring very clearly, he's saying, التاجر الأمين الصدوق المسلم مع الشهداء يوم القيامة. The martyrs are in the higher status, and he's saying that the merchant, the trader, the Muslim trader, who is honest and saduq, who has sidq, who has truth in him, who has truth on his tongue, who is truthful, trustworthy, that one, the trustworthy, honest merchant, will be with the martyrs on the day of judgment. These are the ideals that they inculcated in themselves. You know, Rasul in Hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam talks about trade. When you have trade, you have to have ikhlas in it. You have to have integrity. And this story tells us, Ishtara rajulun min rajulin iqaran. The man bought some land from one person, and then he discovered a jar in it with an earthen pot with gold. And so he went to the person who he bought it from and said, look, you better come and collect your gold. I found some in the land. And he said, well, look, I sold the land and what was in it, so it's for you. You have to take it. That person refused. And the dispute developed. The dispute developed on who should take the gold. The man saying, no, it's yours. And he's saying, no, it's yours. And then eventually they got someone to come and to sort the matter between them. And they decided that he was going to marry his daughter to a slave girl of someone in their house. And so, and they spent the money. So the two parties were joined through marriage. That's how they dealt with it. Now, what is this showing? It's a different view altogether. And Rasulullah ﷺ is emphasizing on them. He says, رحم الله رجلا سمحا إذا باع وإذا اشترى وإذا اقتضى. That Allah will show mercy to a man who is kind in his trade. When he is kind, he's accommodating, he's forgiving when he sells, he's forgiving and accommodating when he buys and when he makes a claim. So the Sahaba knew this. You know, Uthman radiallahu anhu he was buying a garden, a walled garden, And the man said, just about as you were about to finalize the matter, the man said, no, I want 10,000 more. I need 10,000 more. And Uthman radiallahu anhu turned around to the other Sahaba, Abdurrahman ibn Auf was with him, and he said to him, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أدخل الله الجنة رجلا كان سهلا باعيا ومشتريا, that Allah will enter people into paradise when they are kind and compassionate and sincere, they're soft and accommodating when they're in their buying, in their trading and buying and selling. So take the 10,000 so that I can become deserving of the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This was the character of them, that those traders that arrived in Indonesia inculcated in themselves. There's a story about Imam Hanifa. A woman comes to him and says, I have this cloth, this silk, a pile of cloth I want to sell. How much is it? And he asked her, how much would you want for it? And she said 100. And he said, no, it's more than that. So she said 200. And he said, it's more than that. And she said 300. And he says, more than that. And when it reached 400, she says, are you making fun of me? And then he said, no, bring somebody, bring a man to sort it out. And somebody came and he paid 500 for it. That's the kind of honesty there was in the trade. And warning against, and a person is warned also that of the people who Allah la yukallimu, thalathatun la yukallimuhum Allah, wa la yanzuru ilayhim, the three types of people that Allah will not look at and will not talk to, that will not look at in the day of judgment, and they will have severe punishment, is one of them. The third one is at-tajir, the fajir, the one who al-munfiq sil'atahu bihalf al-kadhib, the one who sells his things or make it ready for selling with incorrect, with lies, with oaths, lying. Another story. He's selling basket of almonds, and he wrote that he will get 63. He bought it for 60, and he said three dinars he will get in profit. And then the person comes, the dalal, the middleman who sells to the others, comes and says, look, the price has gone up to 70 now, so I'll pay you 70. And he said, no, I can't, because I've already made a pact with Allah that I will only take 3. And that person, that trader who was going to take it, says to him, but I made a pact with Allah that I will not rob anyone today, so I don't want it. So neither did he take it or the other one took it. Another story. A shopkeeper, a man goes into a Muslim shop and says, do you have wheat? He said, yes, I have wheat. He said, how much is it? X number is this. It's so and so. So give me some. Give me that amount. He said, no, I don't want you to buy from me. I want you to go across the street and buy from that shop. He said, did that shop have the same wheat? He said, yes, the same wheat, the same price. So why should I go there? He said, since this morning, I have earned already my day's keeping. And I've been looking at my neighbor's shop and no one went there all morning. So I want you to go there and buy it and buy the wheat from that person. That Jew went to the shop, bought the wheat, and then came back to the first shop and said, I took the wheat from that man. Now I came to take Islam from you. This was the type of effect it has. It was because of these ideals and attitudes towards sincerity in trading that people of Indonesia accepted Islam. Yes, as I said, the country with the largest number of Muslims, Indonesia, was turned to Islam when Muslim traders from Yemen and Arabia started trading in those lands with honesty and sincerity, with sidq and ikhlas. There were no battles, no military invasions of Sumatra and Java, but demonstrations of true sidq, genuine sincerity and truthfulness in Muslim trade. These traders attracted people to Islam, and so Indonesia is Muslim today. But the tragedy of our time is that our character and conduct in business and elsewhere is doing the opposite. We're behaving in the same way as everyone else, because we have now internalized all those behaviors, in the same way other people, because this osmotic process of gradual acculturation, we are following the greed is good prescription. We justify all sorts of misleading messaging about our products. And this is why there is a dire need for reconnecting to the fundamental teachings of our faith. And there's no more urgent and more important fundament of our faith than ikhlas and sidq. The need for it is urgent, and it's for that I want to read this book. I want you to approach this part of the subject with those urgent thoughts in mind. Right. I was going to read to you the old Fada'il, but that will take an extra 15, 20 minutes. So what we will do is that we will read the book on Bayanu Haqiqati Sidqi wa Ma'anahu. That i'lam, that the exposition of the reality of sidq, the reality of truth, and its meaning and its levels, its ranks. i'lam anna lafz as-sidq yusta'mal fi sittati ma'anin. Know that your اعلم أن الصدق يستعمل في ستة معان. صدق في القول, that know that sidq is applied to 6 things. صدق في القول, this is truthful in speech. صدق في النية والإرادة, truthfulness in intention and will. صدق في العزم, truthfulness in determination. And صدق في الوفاء بالعزم, and truthfulness in the fulfillment of your determination. وصدق في العمل, and truthfulness in your deeds. وصدق في تحقيق مقامات الدين كلها, and truthfulness in achieving all the stations of deen. فمن اتصف بالصدق في جميع ذلك, so who has inculcated, who has characterized all of these 6 in his character, فهو صديق, he will be the Siddiq, the affirmer of truth. لأنه مبالغة في الصدق, this is a superlative of صدق. ثم هم أيضا على درجات, and each one are in different stages. فمن كان له حظ في الصدق في شيء من الجملة, whoever has a fortune of صدق, a fortune of truthfulness of any of these 6, فهو صادق, he will be known as صادق, a truthful person, بالإضافة إلى ما فيه صدق, in that particular category. Now, الصدق الأول, the first صدق, is صدق اللسان, صدق on the tongue, which is truthfulness on the tongue. وذلك لا يكون إلا في إخبار. This is only about narration and news and giving testimony. أو فيما يتضمن الإخبار والنية وينبه عليه, which is something you add. Somebody says, oh, so and so is in the house, is so and so in the house, you say yes. والخبر إما يتعلق بالماضي أو المستقبل, and the information that you give is either related to the past or the past or the future. وفيه يدخل الوفاء بالعهد, and in this it includes the fulfillment of promises. وحق على كل عبد أن يحفظ ألفاظه, and it is incumbent on every servant that he controls his words, controlling of the words. فلا يتكلم إلا بالصدق, he does not speak except with صدق, except with truth. And remember what I say, the hadith last time. Remember what I said the last time. Somebody is not in, there's a sister still waiting. Okay. Alhamdulillah. Yeah. Now remember what I said the last time about the fact that moment, one word could change your entire life. So I want you to remember that sidq is a formatting for your tongue. If you train yourself with sidq, then that will guide you to developing a mode of talk. And this is why I'm saying verbal habits here. This is why we had this term verbal habits in the title of this series, is that إخبار الأشياء على خلاف ما هي, that because when you have to protect your tongue from saying things that are contrary to reality. If you protect yourself from things that are contrary to reality, to what things that are inaccurate, things that are inconclusive, things that are willfully wrong, then you protect yourself from all of those things, then you will be صادق. ولكن لهذا الصدق كمالان. But there are 2 supplementary conditions that are necessary for this. The 2 supplementary conditions are, the first is al-ihtirazu an al-ma'arid. الاحتراز عن المعارض, that this is to avoid indirect references and allusions. Now, and this is the one that's connected to postmodernism, postmodern thought, where people use language in a way that is confusing. And you're not, and inshallah, next week we will go into this, we'll talk about postmodernism. But what I want to, the point he's getting across here is that a person may, you can use indirect language for good reasons and for bad reasons. You can use it for saying, for avoiding saying lies, and you can do it for avoiding saying the truth. So he said, فِي الْمَعَارِيضِ مَنْدُوحَةٌ عَنِ الْكِذْبِ, that in illusions there is an escape from lies. وذلك لأنها تقوم مقام الكذب, because it instead of it takes the place, an illusion, you're saying something indirect, that takes the place of lies. إذ المحظور من الكذب, but this is problematic because the thing that is wrong with lies is تفهيم الشيء على خلاف ما هو عليه في نفسه. That this is the reason why lies are so terrible, is to give the impression of something that is completely opposite to what you are saying, and that is the reason. إلا أن ذلك مما تمس إليه حاجة. But there are some exceptions in this, which we will talk about. There are, if like in matters of bringing people together, in matters of war, in matters of in things that you say to your wife, there are exceptions that you can say. You can use illusion to avoid saying lies. But in general, في هذا الموضع ينبغي أن يعدل إلى المعارض وما وجد إليه سبيل. وكان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم used to say that he's going in one direction, in fact he's going in another direction, and this was to protect himself. وذلك لكي لا ينتهي الخبر إلى الأعداء فيقصده, that the enemy will find out where he's going and they may attack him. وليس هذا من الكذب, and this is not كذب, this is not lies. وقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ليس بكذاب من أصلح بين اثنين فقال خيرا أو نما خيرا. He said that the person is not a liar who does something to bring two people together, says something to bring two people together. He will not, if he uses illusions in different things. So, but generally, to avoid obfuscation, to become an obscurantist, and this is what most postmodernists are now, which we will talk about next week. You use language that people don't understand, and you confuse people, which is like we said just now, that doubt will be our product, like the tobacco companies did. These are all things to be avoided. ثم التعريض فيه الأولى طريق ما حكي عن بعض أنه كان يطلب بعض. To avoid ظلم as well, you can use illusion. You're allowed to do this, but it's generally about and he gives a story here about a man who was in a house, and some people were trying to kill him, and he says to his wife, draw with your finger a circle, and said that he's not in this circle, and she did. فالكمال الأول في اللفظ أن يحترز عن صريح اللفظ وعن المعاريض أيضا إلا عند الضرورة. That you have to, so if you want to perfect your sidq, if you want to perfect your ability to speak truth, then the first thing you have to do is to avoid using obscurantist language, is to avoid these obfuscating and illusions. Speak clearly so people understand what you're saying. That's one, not hedging like a lot of business people do. The second thing that you need for Kamal, for the perfection of your sidq, is أن يراعي معنى الصدق في ألفاظه التي يناجي به ربه عز وجل. If you have no place of training of your tongue to speak the truth with your heart, because speaking the truth, you have to connect it with the heart so that the will is connected. The will is to convey the truth. Then the tongue will follow. The tongue and the will, the tongue and the heart has to be connected. And for this, you need practice. You need to habituate. That verbal habit that you need has to be habituated somewhere in order for you to then practice it with elsewhere. Those tujjar, those merchants that went to Indonesia, they would have practiced speaking truth, and they would have known the value of truth. What did they do? How did they practice it? That in the perfection of it. And perfecting it, the best place to perfect it, the most valuable place to protect and train your tongue and train your heart and train your entire being in the art of sidq, in getting into the mode, into the groove of sidq, the groove of truthfulness, that you will be truthful always, is to train yourself when you are in front of Allah, when you're speaking with Allah. And this is the second point he's saying. The first is to avoid this convoluted language, and the second is to train yourself when speaking, train your heart, your mind, when you are in front of Allah. So he's saying, كَقَوْلِكَ, when you say at the beginning of each salah, وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِيَ الَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاءِ وَجْهِيَ الَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, that I turn my face to the one who created the heavens and the earth. You're not saying literally just your face, you're saying your heart as well. I'm turning my heart towards Allah. I'm now facing Allah. My face, in other words, my heart towards Allah. فإن قلبه إن كان منصرفا عن الله. So if his heart is then turned away from Allah when he is saying وجهت وجهي, that I've turned my face, I've faced my heart towards Allah. When he says this, فإن كان منصرفا عن الله, if it's turned away from Allah, مشغولا بأماني الدنيا وشهواتها, that is occupied with the wishes of the dunya. He's thinking about, the house, the car, the bank account, my trade, and all the other stuff that goes on. When we are saying إني وجهت وجهي للذي فطر السماوات in salah, but our heart is all over the place. So he should be able to point to himself and say, فهو كاذب, that this is a lie. I'm saying, what did I say? I say, and then another one. When we say, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ, oh Allah, it is you alone we worship. You alone we're concerned about in our worship. But we have Riya. Then what is it? إِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ, you alone we ask for help. فَقَوْلُهُ أَنَا عَبْدُ اللَّهِ, another one. When you say that I am a slave of Allah. Now in this one, there's an interesting morphological benefit of concentrating on the Arabic words instead of the English, because sincerity, there's no connection. There's no morphological connection between the word sincerity and the word worship. The word slave and the word worship. There's no connection in English. But in Arabic, ubudiyya and abd, slave and worship, are connected by a morphology. It's exact, they're derived words. They have close connection. So when they're used in the mind and the brain, they are connected. They activate the same areas, those functions, for you to remember that you are a slave. You have no option. A slave. What is the idea of a slave? The idea of a slave is someone who has no choice. He just does what his masters want. So in this, you are abd, you are a servant. That is what ubudiyya. So when you say ana abdullah, فإنه إذا لم يتصف بحقيقة العبودية, if he says that I'm a slave, but he does not carry the realities, the characteristics, he does not embody those characteristics of slavery to Allah, وكان طلبه سوى الله وكان له مطلب سوى الله, and he had his own projects and his own wishes and his own plans and his own things that he's doing, then لم يكن كاملا لم يكن كلامه صادقا, then his truth, then that will not be sidq when he says أنا عبد الله, that I am a servant of Allah, I am a slave of Allah. ولو طلب يوم القيامة, these are things you have to keep in mind, that if I'm asked on the day of judgment, ولو طلب يوم القيامة بالصدق في قوله أنا عبد الله, when he's called on the day of judgment to say that you are a slave of Allah, then what happens? لعجز عن تحقيقه, he would not be able to demonstrate it, because he was claiming to be slave of Allah, but he was acting like a free man on everything else. So فإنه إن كان عبدا لنفسه أو عبدا لدنيا أو عبدا لشهواته لم يكن صادقا في قوله. If he was a slave to his desires, a slave to the dunya, a slave to the worldly pursuits, or a slave to his wishes and wants, then لم يكن صادقا في قوله. Then he cannot be sadiq. He cannot be truthful really to himself, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In when he says Abdullah, وكل ما تقيد العبد فيه فهو عبد له. And everything that controls a person, that person is a slave to it. You're a slave. And this is why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, تعس عبد الدينار. تعس عبد الدينار. May the slave of the dinar be miserable. تعس عبد الدرهم. May the slave of the dirham, which is dinar, the currency is the money. If you're slave to money, then وعبد الخميسة, and silk cloth and cloaks, things of the world, you can become slave to those things. فسمى كل ما تقيد قلبه كل من تقيد قلبه بشيء عبدا له. So he's labeled everything with which the heart is attached to it an abd. This is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is doing. He's labeled a person. If you're captured by it, if your heart is captured by the love of money, then you are a slave of it. عبدا له. And if you're a slave, so he's saying تقيد عبدا له وإنما العبد الحق وإنما العبد الحق لله عز وجل من أعتق أولا عن غير الله تعالى. So the one who is truly a slave of Allah is the one who has become free from the slavery of all others. So you have to become free from the slavery of the money, slavery of the wealth, slavery of the desire, slavery of all the other things that captures you, that in which you in whose grip you are. You have to remove yourself. So there is need for freedom, but it's not the freedom to follow shaitan or the freedom to follow the wishes in Islam. There's the freedom from all to be in the slavery of Allah. Okay, we'll have to continue next week, inshallah. But this is as much as I will say today. Let us pray. اللهم أنت ربنا لا إله إلا أنت خلقتنا ونحن عبادك ونحن على عهدك ووعدك ما استطعنا نعوذ بك من شر ما صنعنا ونبوء لك بذنوبنا فاغفر لنا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. Ya Allah, oh Allah, open our hearts. Oh Allah, open our hearts to your mercy. Oh Allah, grant us sidq on our tongue. Oh Allah, grant us sidq on our tongues. Oh Allah, grant us truthfulness. Grant us the value of truth. Oh Allah. Oh Allah, make us examples of truth. Oh Allah, open our hearts to truth. Oh Allah, you are the giver of the truth. You are al-haq, Ya Allah. Oh Allah, place it into our hearts. Bury it into our hearts so that there is no space for falsehood. There is no space for falsehood in our hearts, Ya Allah. Oh Allah, accept us. Oh Allah, forgive us. Oh Allah, forgive us our shortcomings. Oh Allah, forgive us our shortcomings. Oh Allah, we are trying. Oh Allah, these young people are trying. These are young people who have all other things to do at university, but they have come to you here to seek a path of righteousness, to seek a path of deen, to seek a path of light. Oh Allah, help them, protect them, Ya Allah, protect their hearts, protect their iman, and protect them from the designs of shaitan. Oh Allah, protect them from the designs of shaitan. اللهم اقسم لنا من خشيتك ما تحول به بيننا وبين معاصيك ومن طاعتك ما تبلغنا به جنتك ومن اليقين ما تهون به علينا مصائب الدنيا ومتعنا بأسماعنا وأبصارنا وقواتنا ما أحييتنا واجعله الوارث منا واجعل ثأرنا على من ظلمنا وانصرنا على من أعادانا ولا تجعل مصيبتنا في ديننا ولا تجعل الدنيا أكبر همنا ولا مبلغ علمنا ولا تسلط علينا من لا يرحمنا يا رب يا كريم. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات يا رب يا كريم. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم أعنا على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. اللهم أعنا على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. اللهم أعنا على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وصل اللهم على رسوله النبي الكريم وسلم تسليما كثيرا. آمين آمين يا رب العالمين. طيب, the brothers in the room, so did you miss half an hour of the class? Ahnaf, are you there?
No, we were able to hear you, but I wasn't let in. But
all right, sorry. Yeah, I'd let you in, but did you get
yeah, I had
knocked
to
out?
leave to join on my laptop, and then I realized you're the only host left. So unless you let me in, I don't know.
Oh, right. Sorry about that. Anyway,
No,
inshallah, we have the recording, so those of you who missed can catch up. Yeah, inshallah. The recordings of last week has also gone up, so those of you who missed that, please join. Please listen to it there. Inshallah, next week we're going to study other aspects of sidq, but from the perspective of postmodernism, which is a big tragedy in our world today as well. So inshallah, do find time to attend. And another thing I wanted to say is that you can listen to the recording, and the recording is there for those of you who aren't able to make it. But if you're able to make it, don't rely on just the recording, because it's important. I really would like you to be part of the dua, the live dua. There's benefit in that, inshallah. We're hoping that you come, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will inshallah answer your ameen in it, and make it a blessing for you and for all of us, inshallah. So do try to make it in the live program too. Jazakallah khair. Tayyib. Is there any questions? Are there any questions?
Yeah, it might be quiet, but yeah.
No?
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
I had a question from last time, please. So when you mentioned hiding ibadat, extra salah, extra fasting, is that a way to protect us from riyah, or only if you recognize that you already have riyah? Is it treatment or more protection? Because often spreading goodness can influence others. Like for instance, if you say, oh yeah, I woke up for Fajr, I do Monday and Thursday fasting. Sometimes if someone mentions it to me, it's more of a reminder. So I myself would do it. And then if I do with the intention that someone might also follow in this, is that like, I don't know what the line is. If you start with this intention, maybe you forget along the line that you're doing it for the sake of making others doing the same thing. And eventually, if you get praise for this, maybe your heart changed. So when you mentioned hiding, was that for protection more or treatment only when you know that you already have riyah?
Yeah, there's a progression of treatment. First, there's the importance of ikhfa, which is hiding, and that needs to be done consistently in the beginning. If you find yourself feeling that you're the urge to tell people and to give instructions to people, then you need to scrutinize the reason for why you're doing it. There is no harm in telling people to do it and not saying that you have done it. That's true, that there are people who hide their actions and don't allow anyone else to know. And for instance, you're in a house, and I know this is the way it's been done. I've seen in sleeping with the mashayikh is that they will wake us up for tahajjud after they have done all their prayers. I used to be with a sheikh. In the night, he would get up and just wake you up and then go to bed. And we'll think no one would have seen him pray, but he's woken us up to pray. And that was after he had prayed. So there is that about hiding. But so to train yourself, that the default is to hide. But if you feel that it's necessary, that it will help somebody, and you're not doing it for riyah, then you can, because these are the areas of exception. There are things you cannot hide, and there are things sometimes you want the reward for others to do it. You want people to do it so you can man sanna sunnatan hasanatan falahu ajru misla fa'ili falahu ajru fa'ilihi wa la yanqus min ujurihim shay'a. That whoever sets a good example and people follow, then you will get their full reward. So if that is uppermost in your heart, then that's fine. The problem develops when people start speaking of it, or when the simulation begins in your heart, saying, oh, I have told this person to do tahajjud, and they're starting doing tahajjud, and they will tell people that, oh, she told me to do that, and people will really like me for giving her such good advice. That's the that cascade of simulations in the mind. So when that starts in the mind, you've got to arrest it straight away and say, no. Hold it right there. Are you trying? And you have to address yourself. Sayyidina Umar used to speak to himself loudly. He once he hit a man and he sought his forgiveness, but then at home his servant found him saying to himself, Ya Umar, that this person came, oh Umar, this person came to ask a question and you hit him. And he kept saying it until the servant had to go and say, no, it's enough, kafa, it's enough. So addressing yourself is a good way of dealing with it, and you deal with the thought. Malaka walinnas. What is it to you if people know or people say anything? That's nothing. That's actually dangerous for you. So it's arresting the thoughts that flow from it in the simulations. Those are the things you have to be worried about. But in this stage, this early stage, we are learning about Ikhlas. We are learning about these things. It's important to practice ikhfa, practice hiding, because if you've never practiced hiding, then you wouldn't know the difference between hiding and showing. So we've been practicing showing quite a lot all our lives. This is what we grow up and learn, but we have not tasted and know the beauty of having a moment with Allah alone knowing what you have done between you and Allah. Hada bayni wa bayn Allah. When you taste the pleasure of that, the bounty that Allah has given you, with that realization, that, oh Allah, you know, and I know. Let's not let anyone else know. And you reward me for this on the day of judgment. When you start tasting the pleasure of that, then it will eclipse everything else and it will help you. It will be easier for you to deal with those cascading, those resulting thoughts of later damaging of it. Okay? Yeah, okay. I think that should be sufficient. Yeah, any other question? No, okay. Jazakumullahu khairan wa barakallahu feekum. Inshallah, we'll see you all next week. طيب, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.